Hi, everyone. It's so great to have you on the podcast today, Charlie. Charlie is a best-selling author of The Small Business Life Cycle, a guide to taking the right steps at the right time to grow your small business. His blog and his business at productiveflourishing.com helps people with productivity and creativity. And Charlie also helps creative giants win in all they do every day. And so thanks so much, Charlie, for taking the time to be on the podcast today. I'm so excited to talk to you.
I'm excited too. Thanks for having me.
Oh, awesome. Well, I felt like I was, taking a business course, honestly, when I read your book. And I don't know, maybe I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way because, I hadn't processed, I hadn't taken the small, I think I see bigger and to take it down into small steps, right? With each step that is required when you are starting. I hadn't honestly thought of that. And so it was a real eye opener. And then of course, I had found your blog post about creative giants, and I had actually shared it with both with our older daughter, who is an artist, and she's going to art school right now, and with our son, who he actually has made his own computer. He creates maps for online gaming. He's just got creativity out of his fingertips, right?
Yeah.
And it's just so awesome to hear how that's me. I didn't realize that's
That's a thing. That's totally a thing. It's not just me.
Yeah. So anyway, I was just, I've ever since that was last year in this, I don't know, in the spring or something, and ever since then I wanted to talk to you. So.
Well, I'm sorry it's taken so long. I'm excited.
Yeah.
It's interesting, as you mentioned, two different creative types, right? So sometimes we want to think of like the rational creative types, the gamers,
Yes.
the programmers,
Yes.
and then we think of like the more intuitive, or what most people think of when they think of creative people, right? So we imagine your daughter, she's painting and she's got the black beret, and your son's got the glasses and he's got maybe the pocket protector, if they still do that. And the thing about it is we end up telling ourselves so many stories about what it means to be a creative person. And that's what I've been encouraged about that particular post, is that it's made room for people to really see that, like, this weird way that I take ideas, put them in the world, that's creative too.
Yeah. And that's just, it feels like it makes room for the rest of us, if that even makes sense. I don't even know, but that's how it feels. Because, sometimes you're trying to figure out, where do we fit?
Yeah, we're weird about that, right? Creative people are very strange sometimes, because we want to be like, where do we fit?
Yeah.
And we don't want to fit in. Right?
Okay, so that's true.
Tension.
Actually, that's true.
There's tension. Like, I don't like the label, but how do I talk about myself, and where do I fit? And it's kind of like we're the duckling that's like, are you my mom? Are you my label? Right? Are you my thing? Do I belong here? No. Everybody looks the same here. I don't belong here. Right? I'm going somewhere else. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think being a creative person a lot of times is living with all of these series of connections and disconnections and random flotsam and jetsam of ideas all at once.
Yeah.
Right? And making sense to it, and seeing the dots, connecting the dots, and sharing those dots, right? It's really what it takes. And we all have different ways in which we show up. And fundamentally, to be human is to be creative. Right?
Yeah.
And so I oftentimes get confused when people ask me, like, how can I be more creative? And I'm like, that's like asking, how could you be more human? I don't understand the question. I mean, I understand where it's coming from. How can they normally mean, how can I do something with my ideas? That's a question of productivity.
Yeah.
Or it's, how do I become a painter? Okay. That's an activity. Creative, like that. Yeah. You just are.
Yeah. No, that's really good. That's really good. And I think maybe more of us creative people just need to realize that, right? Where we don't have to actually fit into that box, into that label, and just be, right?
Yeah. I mean, we see the same thing with artists, right? And so many people, when they're starting their journey, it's, well, are you, they shy away from calling themselves an artist because that's a culturally loaded word.
Yeah.
They don't know if they're an artist. You know, if you're a writer, you think of Stephen King, or you think of that. If you're a painter, you think of all the painters. If you're a musician, so you get so much, you get so trapped into that. And a lot of times it's just easier to say, you know what, I'm a painter.
Yeah.
What makes me a painter? I paint. It's that simple, right? I'm a writer. And so, you have to be, labels are a strange thing, Lorna. They're a very, very strange thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's true. I totally get that. We want to fit in, and yet we don't, because we want to, we
want to fit in, but we want to be different.
I know.
I don't know.
Oh, that is so true. Well, do you mind just so people kind of get to know you better? Do you mind sharing your own story and kind of how you got to where you are now with productive flourishing and all that?
Yeah, I'll tell the short version, and then if you want me to tell the long version, I'll do that. So, really, I didn't consider myself like a creative person actually until my mid-20s. To be honest, because part of it is I grew up in a house with someone who was very creative in the sense of he was a painter, he played the violin, he had that sort of classic creative moodiness, right? That like, and I didn't, right? I was a guy, I drew, I drew grids, and I organized data, and I played with ideas, and but anyway, so. What happened was, and the reason I got started on this particular version of myself is I was simultaneously a Army Joint Force Military Logistics Coordinator, which is a mouthful that's basically saying, making sure that the Army and the Air Force were talking to each other during their missions on the same operational plan and meeting the same deadlines. And so I was doing that on the one side, and on the other, I was completing my PhD in philosophy. So I'm a social philosopher there. And I had these two worlds sitting, and I was like, from the military side, I have this very rich training and experience with how to get stuff done at a very large level. And yet I was struggling to get a friggin' philosophy paper done, right? It's like, how is it that I can't write 6,000 words, but I can move battalions? Something is wrong here, right? Yeah. And at the same time, there's a lot of the I have to be careful to say this, because if I say it incorrectly, it's not fair. There's a lot of the sort of broader holistic thinking that I had from the philosophy side of things that didn't always show up in the military work, right?
Okay.
And so what I started doing, and then I had just come back from being deployed, and my wife and I had a new house. And so it very quickly became obvious to me that I had more to do than I was able to do.
Yeah.
And so I did what any researcher and military scientist does. I started researching how other people did this.
Yeah.
And what I found is the current body of literature there really didn't speak to me. And it really didn't get me that much further. And so I started just went to the labs, okay, I know about this and I know about this. How do we put them together, come up with something new, and maybe pull in a little bit from Covey and Stephen Covey and Allen and just the literature out there. So I started sharing these tools and ideas for how to really get creative knowledge work done. How do you do creative work, and not just pushing pixels around, and not just doing this sort of shallow work, but how do you do the best work or deep work? Shout out to Cal Newport with his new book. Deep work is just one of those things everyone on this call is going to get hired not on this call, but just it's going to be one of those phrases that stick. So I started sharing that on Productive Flourishing. Productive Flourishing was not the first name. So I'm just, telling people that. It had two really terrible names before I ended up with Productive Flourishing, which is not a great name even still. But I hung out there and I started teaching and started sharing what I did. It got picked up, and it's kind of been growth from accretion. Along the way, people started asking me if I would advise them on planning, and then later on business, and then later on business strategy, and then team development. And, I think the thing about it is so many of us creative people have to see where we're going before we get started. And forget that we create ourselves by creating. Right?
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
And so, had I looked back and said, here's where I'm going, I couldn't imagine the beautiful, crazy, confusing world that I live in now. But I'm so glad I'm here.
Yeah.
So that's really the story.
Yeah.
I can weave in and out, but that's Genesis, and we're just, still here growing and still doing what we do.
Yeah.
Now that was, so for context, that's 2007 or so is when all that started.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. So, I mean, obviously, I mean, it sounds like you've helped just a ton of people during that time, right? And just reading your blog, I've just, been helped so much. And
yeah, I appreciate that. I try,
yeah.
That's the thing is that, where I get pumped up is, the site's productive flourishing. So people automatically assume that I'm really productive, and I am in my own way. That's not where I get super excited about. It's not so much me creating things. It's helping other people create their own work, right? That's where the jam happens. So it's not so much like, and that's a problem sometimes, because I would rather hang out with you or one of my clients or one of my students and see them come to life than sit down and finish my own book. Right.
Okay, yeah.
Right. And so it's like it's a tension, but I think it's just one of those, you have to know, sometimes as a creative person, what you think your medicine is, what you think your creative thing is actually not your creative thing. And the reason I'm saying, because, for instance, I'll take web designers. A lot of web designers figure out that they don't actually like designing websites.
Really?
Right. They like taking people's ideas and helping people's ideas come to life. And they do that through websites. But once you make that distinction, you can find ways in which it's like, you know what, maybe there are other ways to do this thing that I actually really love doing. And web coding has been a vehicle, but it's not the only vehicle to get where I'm trying to go.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. That's really good. Yeah. So, I mean, this is obviously helping so many creative people that are listening right now, but many that are listening are like storytellers, whether it's fiction or nonfiction.
Mm-hmm.
And many actually are indie authors, and they're kind of living in that tension between, practical structure and thoughtful, running through the hills side of creativity. And so how do storytellers or creatives, how do they merge the two and, flourish in a way that will help them get them to their goals?
So let's counterpose if we can.
Okay.
Right? Let's counterpose structure and creativity.
Okay.
Because I think one of the creative myths that we have is that structure and creativity are on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
Right? That is one of the most crippling myths that you will ever have as a creative person.
Okay.
And let me explain. I like to do it by way of metaphor. And so let's take this glass, right?
Yeah.
Inside the glass is the water, right? That's the creativity, right?
Yeah.
Really useful stuff. But without the container, the structure, it actually has no value to us. We can't use it purposefully.
Yeah.
Right? And the reason I want to say it that way is, there are plenty of people that are like, I'm a pantser or I'm a plotter, right?
Yeah.
And they've sort of defined how they get their work done. And if that's working for you, great. It doesn't work for a lot of people, right? And so what I would say about that is there's this trick, and I wish I could say specifically, Lorna, here's how to do it. I wish I had that roadmap for each and every person. I don't. But what I'll say is to exist in that space to where structure enhances creativity and creativity creates structure is where your best work is going to come, right? And so I'll leave it there because I think that's what you really have to look for. From the structure side, how can I as a writer create the types of habits, to create the type of social environment, to create the type of conceptual environment between what I consume and how I organize my ideas that actually helps me do something with those ideas, right? And as someone that is so structured, they've got the list upon list upon list, and they can't actually break out of that. As how can they create? How can they let go of that overstructure? And actually go into that nexus between really what they plan to write and what will be written, because any writer knows that there's a big distinction between what you plan to write and what you end up writing, right?
Yes.
And that's where the magic happens, though. That's really where the magic happens. And I think before you do a lot of writing and you get used to the writing habit, it can actually cause you to be stuck, because it's like you think that the idea in your head about how your story or about how your writing is going to turn out is better than what will actually turn out. Most cases, it's not.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a lot of food for thought. That's really great. Because I as a writer, when I'm writing fiction, I do get into that. I don't know what it's called. Is it like a flow zone where you're getting into that? It's like the movie's playing in your head, and
Yeah.
kind
The characters are speaking to you, right? The story is
yeah,
revealing in front of you. Yeah.
yeah,
It's a flow state in writing, right?
yeah,
And if you overstructure that
yeah,
and try to put too much of what you think the story should be in that, it's going
yeah,
to shut it down, right?
yeah,
And so I'm not the first one that's come up with this, right? And obviously I don't teach writing specifically in that capacity, but I do a lot of writing
yeah,
and do a lot of coaching of writers. So the
yeah.
thing that we have to recognize is drafting and editing are two different styles of writing.
Yes,
Two different styles of writing. And if you let the editor in as you're in the drafting mode, it's the best way to get the drafter to check out, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so just recognizing that. And, I have a lot of both sympathy and empathy for fiction writers
Yeah.
because I write nonfiction, right?
Yeah.
Most of the time. And there's exploratory writing and there's explanatory writing, right? Two different styles of writing,
Yeah.
right? And most of the time as a fiction writer, it's exploratory writing, which is slower. You don't know where you're going. You're groping in the dark, right? You're hoping that something comes like this 2 hours, right?
Yeah.
You have a scene when you have a scene list, you know kind of how the story's going, which is, there are some really great books. Here's the problem with Kindle books, right? I can't look on my shelf and tell you what the book is.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But there are some great books that will help with structuring scenes and things like that give you just enough scaffolding.
Yeah.
So you kind of know where the story is going, but not so much that you prevent the story from going where it wants to go.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying there is like, I can sit down most of the time and make a list of here's in this nonfiction conceptual journey that I'm taking people on.
Yeah.
Here are the destinations, right? But in a very similar way, it's like with a novel, right? Or a story, it's like, where are the destinations, which are scene by scene by scene. Now, when you sit down and start writing, both as a fiction or a nonfiction writer, that's where a lot of magic happens because I actually don't know like how those steps are going to be made, right? I don't know how paragraphs are going to come together. And that's the beautiful part of it.
Yeah. No, and that you're right, because it often has the twists and turns that, what? Where'd that come from?
Yeah. Like the story tells you that the lead character, or that the person you thought was going to be the lead character, that person needs to die.
Yeah.
Like, where did that come from? That's not the story I was writing, right? But all of a sudden it becomes the story.
I know. And it surprises you, but then when you look back, you think, oh, actually that makes sense now. That's why that happened. So
yeah. Normally, like as you're writing, on the fiction side, you don't have enough tension, right? And so just when things like that happen, what it is your mind saying like, we've got to have some tension here.
Yeah.
Right. Or there's too much tension and an element needs to go to beat it up. But you can't consciously think about that as you're doing the writing, right? But I think the internal creative inside of you is a lot of times a lot smarter than the rational sort of, cognizant writer.
Yeah.
For what it's worth.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's really true. So just kind of continuing on with, because we were talking about creating flow and all of that, but just kind of a little moving on from that. You talk about having value flow and having a continual prolificness, in your blog posts and stuff for creating, for being creative, and yet there's there are, we kind of go in fits and starts. So I do, maybe I'm just talking about, but so one day I'll be like, oh, look at all these words that's coming out. The next day, what? I'm having a hard time getting like 200 words in. And I don't know, is there a way to move toward more of what we want, which is, I guess as writers, more words, being more productive and less of what we don't want? Is there like I don't know, maybe some tips?
Yeah. So serial creativity typically trumps parallel creativity, meaning finishing one thing at a time.
Oh, okay.
Typically is a better path to go. Now, it gets tricky when you're a writer because The way I try to think about it is I typically have a big project that's taking a lot of my creative bandwidth, but then I have a bunch of smaller projects, like I need to get a newsletter out, or I need to like write a blog post or something like that. That it's still creative, but it's not one of those things where like I really got to get out the creative jaws of life and figure out how I'm going to get this idea out of me, right?
Yeah.
And so on the one hand, so there's this tension here, and I wish that it sounded less disharmonious, or less dissonant. That's actually the word I'm looking for. Less dissonant here. But on the one hand, like you can kind of think about it, serial productivity in big projects. So you only write one big book at a time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And you might have several shorter stories that you can alternate between. So when you get stuck here, it's like, well, I'm going to work on this other thing. And you might go back and forth. That tends to be a good way of going. Another way is just to understand that here's the tension. I've often experienced where people having one or two big projects that they will, like you got one in the ship, one in the slip, and one that you're actually working on.
Yeah,
can be a good tool. But what we don't want, and what I haven't seen work very well for people, is for people to have 7 to 15 outside, like creative projects where they're trying to get something done. Like I think getting between, 2 to 5, I normally say 3 to 5 projects where you're just kind of continually working on them is the way to go. Now, that's at the project level. What we often forget about as creative people is that the most taxing thing we do is actually the creative work. We love it, but it's really taxing.
It is.
When you do the studies on this stuff, what you see is that most peak performing creatives max out after about 6 hours of creativity, right? After about 6 hours of work. Now, depending upon how much time we have to jam here, we could talk about, like, I don't think in terms of hours that much anymore. I think in terms of creative blocks, right? And a block is 90 to 120 minutes, right? Our body goes through circadian cycles. About every 90 to 120 minutes, your body recycles. And this is your sleep cycles are governed by it. A lot of your energetic cycles throughout the day are governed by it. And so it turns out that once you get in your own sort of productivity zone, you can actually use that as a refresh period, because you can sit down, you're fresh, and your body will just recycle. But anyway, so I think 3 creative blocks, and it's also easier, I think, because most of us, maybe I'll ask you, I'll say it and then I'll ask you. What I've discovered in my work is that most of us know about how much writing we can do in a creative block.
Yeah.
Right? Know if we sit down, like, I'm going to produce about that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have no idea what will produce over a day. Right?
Yeah.
We tend to really overestimate how much we will create on a day, right? But we know what we can do in a creative block. And so what I would say on that one is what I've experienced and what may be causing the fit and start cycle is that you're trying to push 4 or maybe 5 creative blocks and you're wearing yourself out. And then the next day, it's not that you're not creative, you're just friggin' tired, right? It would be like going, so I mean, here's the metaphor, the analogy here. It'd be like going to the gym one day. And working out for 5 hours and then being frustrated the next day that you're sore and tired and can't move, right? It's like, unless you work out 5 hours a day, like, you're going to be sore and tired and not able to use that muscle. And I think creativity is like that too, is where there's a way of being continually prolific, continually creating something without burning yourself out. And my friend and man crush, Todd Kashtan. Well, I have a man crush on him, to be honest. I don't know about the river. I need to ask him about that. A few years ago, he's a positive psychologist, right? Works at George Mason University. And he did a study on people's, I think it was their happiness and their productivity. And what he found consistently is that people who had a consistent output, whether it be 2 hours a day, and they just did that 2 hours a day, were consistently more prolific and happier than people that had the fit and start cycle.
That makes sense.
And so that's what I would encourage you. Now, normally the resistance that I would get when I introduce an idea like that is, well, but what about like that one day when I'm super on fire? Like I should lean into it. Well, it's just one of those things that imagine that you could use constructively 2 creative blocks every day. for the rest of your life, right?
Yeah.
And so if that's, for instance, I know in a creative block, I'm going to write 1,500 to 2,000 words, right? On most occasions, right?
Yeah.
If I were to write, 4,000 words a day on a project or on 2 projects and do that for a long time, it turns out that you get a whole hell of a lot more done, right? And you feel better about it than if you have that random, like every 2 weeks, you have that one day that you're on fire, right?
Yeah.
So the creative block setup also allows me to talk about firewalling your creative time.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what I've experienced, especially with women, is that you might be, for instance, Lorna, your hot zones might be from 9 to 1 o'clock, 9 a.m. in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Let's pretend.
Okay.
And that's precisely when you schedule doctor's appointments, or you do the vacuuming, or that's the perfect time to clean out the closet, right? It's during 9 to, it's actually not, right? It's, you have this expendable supply of creative hours.
Yeah. And
the very best thing that you can do is get everything that's not creative out of there, right? Which sometimes will require conversations with partners and family members of like, hey, between 9 and 1 p.m., just don't talk to me.
Yeah.
Just don't, right? Or, if, especially for families with young kids that's where you have conversations with your partners. Like, can you watch the kids from this period? Because I got 3 or 4 peak hours and I would love to have that time and I'll swap out with you.
Yeah.
Or is it that you need to talk about childcare arrangements, right? In different ways, right?
Yeah.
And so I think it's 1, knowing when you have that creative time.
Yeah.
2, firewalling it. 3, having the conversations and making the requests that you need to make to really be able to use those creative times. And then 4, be very careful about what you allow yourself to be distracted by, right? So let's think about this, Lorna. There are 2 different types of ways in which we get out of the flow.
Yeah.
1 is we're distracted. 2 is we're interrupted.
That's true.
Some people think they're the same thing, but it's not. Like an interruption is where, the cat walks in and throws up on your foot and walks out, right? That's a legitimate interruption. Like you didn't plan on that happening, right? Or kids running in, or different things like that. That's an interruption, right? A distraction is when you go and get yourself out of the flow. I mean, Facebook and YouTube, they're not walking in and throwing in on your foot. You're going to those sites. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so as strategies go, the way that you minimize distractions is different than the way that you minimize interruptions. Interruptions is largely about changing your environment and having conversations with people around you.
Yeah.
Distractions is largely about having conversations with yourself and setting up constraints that keep you from this.
Yeah.
So, the typical productivity device is shut off all the notifications. Like, sometimes you have to use a smaller screen. Sometimes you have to use a different computer completely. For instance, last year, I ended up buying a Chromebook, right? A Toshiba Chromebook 2. It's like $300.
Okay. Yeah.
And the thing about Chromebooks is they are incredibly limited devices. But they do one thing really, really well. Google Docs, right? I do all of my writing through Google Docs. I do all of my web work. Like I only need a Chrome browser. And so precisely because I don't have a big screen with a bunch of different apps and things like that, it's basically for me, it's a cloud connected typewriter, right? That I don't have to figure out how am I going to get this somewhere else. Like I can just do it on there and then walk upstairs if I need to and share the document, or I can actually share it from the Chromebook. But I created the constraint and then created the discipline around not using that device for anything but writing, right?
Wow.
So when I pick up my Chromebook, guess what? I want to write. When I pick up my MacBook, there's email and Slack and social media, and maybe I need to record the thing, and then this other thing, right? Because I've also set it up so I'm recording in my office right now, right? I've got a 7-inch screen. When I'm in that zone, it's a different type of creative flow than when I'm in that sitting down writing where I just need to sit down and write, right? So that's one of those ways of creating constraints for yourself. Sometimes it's switching computers. And so I wanted to say that about computers because sometimes you talk about that. People are like, oh, it must be nice to have, $2,000 to buy another Mac or things like that. I'm like, not even talking about that, right? There's the Chromebooks that are very, very cost effective, right? And I don't know. I saw, this will seem random. Most of this conversation might seem random, but oh well. I saw a wonderful thing on, I think it was Instagram. And so there's this popular TV show called Empire, right?
Okay.
And the statement was most people spend, people will spend an hour a week watching an empire, but not an hour building their own.
Oh, wow. That's powerful.
When we look at the ways in which we spend our time, energy, and attention, and we look at the ways in which we're already spending money, we can find a pretty big disconnect with that. So again, I'm a business coach and business advisor, and sometimes people wonder, like, how do people pay for that? Well, a good business coach and advisor is going to find the ways you're already spending money and repurpose them, right? So that you actually get a better investment. So that's one way to think about it. But whenever you're thinking about investing in yourself as a writer, compare that to the other economic choices you're already making, right? And so teasing, but if you're drinking, a bottle of wine every, 2 bottles of wine a week, to deal with your frustrations about your writing, well, you know what, that's a good, depending upon, unless it's a $3 chuck, right? That's a good $20 to $40 that you're spending every week. Yeah. Ostensibly around writing. What would happen if you would reclaim that? Yeah. Invest in yourself as a writer, like go to a writing group, or get a good writing book and follow through with it, or join one of the writers communities that will help you with that. So again, I think it's just prioritizing. That's how we got here. Prioritizing your creative energy and your creative output, but more importantly, prioritizing yourself as a person. And understanding that in this independent world of indie writers and independent creativity, like, you've got to invest in your personal growth and professional growth. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. No, that's great. Well, and you know what? So you kind of answered the next question, because that was my next question. How can indie authors change their perspective on, because sometimes writers just want to be writers, right? And not think so much about business, but you kind of have to, if you're wanting to sell your books, right away, then that is becoming a business, right? Yeah. So here's the thing. Yeah. And some people aren't going to like this, but that's okay. Either you're a commercial writer or you're not. Get out of the middle. If you want to write as a hobbyist, that's fantastic. Do that, right? If you want to write words that people buy, you are automatically in commercial writing, right? Yeah. And the reason I say that is because people want to stick in that middle. Like, they don't want to treat it like a job. They don't want to go pro, to use Stephen Pressfield's language. Yeah. You don't want to go pro, but they want the benefits of being pro, right? Yeah. It doesn't work that way. I'm sorry, right? No, here's what I'm saying. Going pro doesn't mean you have to just do a whole bunch of the stuff that you don't want to do, and that you let go of that creativity, and you let go of that art, and you let go of that joy. But there's so many stories, and there's so much head trash that we have around what it means to market and sell. Yeah. That it prevents people from even starting that, right? And I understand it's awkward, right? Because you have to be in some ways crazy to be a commercial writer, because you spend all this time working on something, and then you pull it up out of yourself and you put it to the world and you say, hey, please buy this. Do you like it? Right? It's insane. And that's part of the journey, right? Yeah. And so, and it's not just you, it's not just me, it's just part of taking something that you care about and putting a price tag on it. But that doesn't make it dirty, right? That doesn't, the way I see it is, people buying stuff is just one way in which they're transferring their love and appreciation, right? Yeah. That's all that is. And if you're creating work that's actually, if you're on the fiction side, generally you're delivering delights. That's your job, right? Is to delight people, right? Yeah. On the nonfiction side, it's really education, entertainment, or inspiration, right? Yeah. So those are, and you can mix those quotients up. But that's what you do, right? Yeah. That's you delight people, or you have those other three things that you do. Well, it turns out that Wells Fargo or your bank doesn't take, it won't directly transfer delight and education, inspiration, and entertainment. It won't convert that into a mortgage for you. It's not like mortgage officers, like, they like being entertained, but that doesn't actually pay your mortgage, right? Yeah. So you have to think that going into it, that there's this, actually, once you get over the fear, once you work through the fears, and embrace the fears of selling, there's actually this huge joy, because every time someone buys your book, that's them deciding to spend their hard-earned money on something that you've created for them. Yeah. In a time where we're going through the political debate, so I'm not going to go, it's the worst time in economic history, but in a time where people are really watching their money and where it goes, right? That's a really sort of sacred gift to get from somebody.
Yeah.
Right? And I think when you approach it from that way, and you realize that, you know, and I've worked with a lot of early stage business owners, and there's this idea that they're going to be like the used car salesman and get people to buy something that they don't want. Yeah. Most people aren't good enough salespeople to get people to buy what they already want, right? Yeah. You're not going to be that good to get people to buy something that they don't want, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen, right? And so your whole job is just to make an invitation to people. Here's what I have for you. Here's what I've created for you. And here's the story. Here's the delight. And like share them that. And if they want to buy it, that's on them.
Yeah.
Right? And the third, well, I don't know how many things I've said here, but whatever. I'm going to say the third thing because it sounds fun. It's your job to find your reader, not your reader's job to find you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so there's this whole field of dreams thing. Like if I write the book, the readers will come. Odds are not good that that's going to happen for you, right? Your job is to go find where your readers are and say, hey, I've got something for you, right? And we call that marketing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe we call that advertising too, but you know, you are writing and you're producing something in a world where there are millions of options on a Kindle. If you walk into any of the remaining bookstores, there's thousands upon thousands of other books already on the shelf.
Yeah.
Every person that I know has a list of books already on their shelf that they have not read that they've been wanting to read, right?
Yeah.
And you know, my friend Todd Satterston, when he was on my podcast, I don't know, it's been a while ago, but he reminded me that most Americans will read one book a year.
Okay. Wow.
What are you doing to make sure your book is that one book?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah.
And, you know, I actually think that readership is on the rise with the digital readers and with things like Kindle Unlimited. I think we're actually seeing a new trend in readership that's being tracked differently than it was in the past. And there's also blog readership and online readership. But that's what you got to think about as you're producing a book, is just know that you're producing a book that like most people are going to read one book. Like, and then there's going to be other people that read 300 a year.
Yeah.
You know?
I'd be on that.
I would be closer to the 300, right? So, but that's the question. Where do you find the Lornas and the Charlies, right?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're going out there and you're trying to really convince that one person or that person that like, this is the one book you're going to read this year.
Yeah.
You know, they might want to watch Empire or Duck Dynasty or, you know, Scandal or, you know, whatever their show is, right? Yeah. So that's what you have to really understand from a commercial point of view. That's the world that you live in. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not dirty. It's not like hard in that sense. But how are you going to respond to that environment? It would be like pretending that gravity doesn't exist, right? That would just be irrational, and it's not going to get you very far, right? No. You're not just going to jump and end up on the moon, right? Yeah. That's not the way it works. So that's what I would say about for indie writers.
Yeah.
It's perfectly noble and absolutely fantastic that, you know, if you want to be a hobby writer and you want to write stuff in your free time, you want to share it with your other hobby writer friends, like there's goodness in that, right? You don't have to be a commercial writer. And when you take that step to become a commercial writer, understand that like that means you're going to get in the business of business and marketing and positioning and all of those different things that come with that. And you're joining this large legion of other people that aren't necessarily smarter than you.
Yeah.
That aren't necessarily better than you. Mm-hmm. That aren't necessarily having it more figured out than you do, right? We're all figuring this crap out, right? We are all, I mean, and with social media and everything changing so frequently, we're all figuring this out, you know? Yeah. So join the party, you know?
Yeah. No, thanks for saying that, Charlie. I often feel that way myself, and I, you know, have other writer friends that I hear from that say, oh, but you know, they just must know so much more than I do. Or, you know, like I just don't understand, or I'll hear this kind of stuff. And I've often told myself, well, they must just understand it all. But I guess we're all just kind of figuring it out, right?
We're all just kind of figuring it out. And the authors that end up winning are the ones that are relentlessly focused on either delighting their audience on the nonfiction side. Well, I'm just going to say it all comes down to your audience and your platform.
Yeah.
Right. And so I know when I hear that, like, oh, they've got it all figured out, one of the questions I'll ask people is like, well, what are you doing to build your audience and platform?
Yeah.
And they're like, well, I'm working on the book. And those are two different things, right? Working on your platform and your audience and working on your book are two different things. Yeah. And so, that's just what I would have you focus on. The second you get lost, reach out to a reader, right? Yeah. And if you don't have a reader, go get some readers, right? Write something, like get involved in the community and so on and so forth, so that when you do reach that stuck point and you think, I don't know what I'm doing, people have it all figured out. It's actually, what I am blessed about is at this point in my career, I can reach out and ask people. Like I could say, hey, Lorna, I'm creating this thing. I have no idea what's going on. Like, is this something you would like, right? Is this something, and I'm in conversation with my readers, my audience, who tend to be way smarter in general, but they also are way smarter about what they want, right, than I am.
No, true enough. Yeah, they know what they want. Yeah.
They know what they want. I don't necessarily know what people want. And so I think that's the relationships. And once you understand that you're actually in a co-creative partnership with your readership, it changes things.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's really good. I think Austin Kleon talks about that in his, is it Show Your Work, or was it the other one?
I don't know, but Austin is wicked smart, so it's probably he's a good guy to listen to. Yeah,
because I remember thinking, okay, I need to do more of this, like where it's like that conversation back and forth with people who are wanting to read your books and and just talking to them about, okay, so here I have this antagonist and I don't know, what do you guys think? Or something, I don't know, or
it's having the creative courage.
Yeah.
To say, you know what, I'm really stuck in this story.
Yeah.
And starting to talk about it. Because inevitably, when I've been in writers' workshops and whenever I've worked with any of my writers, fiction or nonfiction, I'm like, so tell me about the story. Tell me about the journey. Where are you? And they'll start talking, and I'm stuck here. And I'm like, oh, really? And so you kind of hang out there, and then they start talking themselves out of their stuckness, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so that's just the thing. It's the beauty. What am I going to say here? I'm in a rage against the machine moment about traditional publishing, right? So I don't want to necessarily go there, but what I will say is the advantage of having being an indie writer is direct connection with your readers.
That's true. Yeah.
Direct connection. So, I'm traditionally, I'm going the traditional route for my book, start finishing.
Yeah.
And I have to, there's the agent, and then there's the acquisitions editor, and then the acquisitions editor's got to sell it to other people on the editorial team, and then the editorial team's got to sell it to the marketing department. And there's 8 steps before a reader, right, actually gets to see the book. And as an author, as you go in there, especially when you have, when you have a blog and you're reaching out to people every day, and this works, guys. Like, why do I have to sell you on content? That I already know work? I've got thousands of other people that love this content. At a certain point, it doesn't matter that they don't get it, right? It matters that Lorna gets it, because they're not going to buy the book. Lorna is going to buy the book. Right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's, having written the Small Business Life Cycle, which was a direct-to-reader, indie published thing.
Yeah.
There are times in which I crave that, because I'm like, you know what? I write the book, I share it with Lorna, and 3 months later, I'm done. As opposed to I write the proposal, which takes 6 months. I make the sell, which takes another 3 months. I start writing the book, which takes a year. They do whatever it takes for a year or 15 months to get it on the shelf. And people ask, when is the book coming out, Charlie? And I'm like, well, it's looking like January 2018.
Yeah.
That's annoying.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is, as an indie writer,
yeah,
the advantages that you have is this direct connection with your readers.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, you don't have to go through basically a committee sell with your ideas every time you do it. 3 is, if you lean into your audience and you lean into your own creative power, you can go from an idea to a finished book a lot faster than people think they can.
Yeah.
So embrace the hell out of that, right?
Yeah.
Don't be on the traditional publishing timeline if you don't have to be, because it's terrible, right? get your work out there and find your readership.
Yeah.
Delight them, right?
Yeah.
I know it sounds so basic and, still true.
Yeah, no, and that's really good. I think sometimes, or at least I'm just talking, for myself, but sometimes, okay, one of the things isn't all the stuff that you need, that's on your plate that you need to do, but sometimes you forget. It's almost like in your mind, you forget that you can actually just contact readers directly. And I know it sounds simple, but sometimes in your mind, you're not remembering that you can actually do that. So go ahead and do that. It's like,
yeah, well, sometimes when people get really stuck around marketing, I say, let's not make a marketing plan. Let's make a communication plan. Let's make a conversation plan.
That's good. That's really good. Yeah.
Because that's really all it is.
Yeah.
Right. How are you reaching out to people? Where are they? And obviously, if you don't have enough people, that's really frustrating. I mean, I work with later stage business owners, and so we have the advantage in some ways of having an audience that we built. And I understand if you've got like 2 people, which is your mom and your parakeet, that's a really frustrating conversation. But it's like, so I'm going to pause here because what we often forget when we're starting out is those first 100 people that follow you, that like you, that join your newsletter list. And I'm going to pause there. If you're an author, an indie writer, start getting people to sign up for your newsletter as soon as possible. I know you're like, newsletter, use MailChimp, write, send people 300 words every 2 weeks about your story, whatever, start that now. Because those first 100 people are your super fans, and that's such a rich moment, because once you get a bigger list, people stop talking to you in a lot of ways. They talk to you differently when they do talk to you. Yeah. But you get this great cell of readers, and your basic job, Lorna, write something for them.
Yeah.
Right? If we were musicians, if we were live musicians, imagine how unnatural it would feel for us to be playing on the stage with, I stepped back from my mic, sorry. Playing on the stage in front of 25 people and really being in there in the moment. Yeah. But really like wanting to play for a bigger audience, or like pretending that we're playing for this, the Madison Square Garden. It would just feel awkward. You can't be in the moment with this audience. Yeah. And, be in your head about that other audience. But the thing about it is, when you talk to a lot of creatives in their zone, even when they're at Madison Square, they're still just playing for the certain people that are in front of them. They're still imagining those people in the audience. And so I think a lot of times in non-performance creativity, we get so stuck in our head. Yeah. And forget that really, if you've got 17 people, write the book that those 17 people would love to read. Yeah. And that's how you get 18. And that's how you get 19. And that's how you get 1900. And that's how you get 2000. That's how you get 20,000, right? It's the same mechanics. Oh, that is so good. Charlie, I know that's what I needed to hear, but I think there's a lot of people listening that needed to hear that too, because I think sometimes, we've all heard this term that we feel like maybe everything has to happen so fast, like that microwave society, whatever. Mm-hmm. But, if we would just value each person that reads our book, and then the next person, and value what they are wanting, and really listen to them for what they're wanting, right? And give them the opportunity to buy from you. Yeah. Right. And I know that sounds different, right? So normally we think of pitching like we got to make them buy, but give them the opportunity to say, I've got a book here, and not everything has to be paid and so on and so forth. But like, you'd be surprised. Like, people are used to buying books. Yeah. Right. That's what we do with books. Yeah. We buy them. Right. Or we get them from the library. And if you're not in a library, how else are they going to get it? So there's just so many ways. And it's really, whether you're making hundreds of sales for your book a day, or whether you're making one sale or no sales, like, you make a sale one person at a time. One single person decides that for them, they're going to buy that book. Yeah. And that's what it all comes down to, is that direct relationship with the reader, one by one by one. Some people have thousands of readers that are making that decision every day. You might have one. Yeah. but it still is the same basic thing.
Yeah. That is really good. That's really helpful.
Thanks.
Yeah. So, okay, we're starting to wind down here, but I do really want to ask you just a couple more questions about, one about, could you talk a little more about creative giants? Like I mentioned before, it's just, along with myself, my kids have really been helped by just how you explained it. Would you just talk about that and, how we can, as creatives, stand taller, and so we can kind of step bigger in what we're called to do?
Great. Thanks. I'll start it by way of how I got there. What I noticed with so many of my readers and so many of the people that I was around is that they were really powerful, creative, compassionate people, but were always sort of downplaying what they could do for a lot of different reasons, right? They didn't want to overcommit because they're prone for overcommitting, right? And so they wouldn't really put themselves out there. They have a tendency to be the person that gets everybody else's projects because they are just the people that get it done, right? They're incredibly afraid of choosing any one thing because they're afraid that they can choose the wrong thing, right? And so that, I list 12 different sort of things about it, but really the image that I kept having in my head is like, we're walking around and just crouching down to be around other people and to be in community with those people. I'm like, why are we doing that? Right? Why don't we find other people, other creative people, and stand tall and walk the way that we can and really find that community of people? And so Creative Giants came out of the frustration of people trying to define. So I get that interview question. It's like, so how can I get more? How can I be more creative? And I'm like, as I mentioned earlier, it's like I think that's and different, or that's a difficult question to answer, right? My people that I was working with, the people that I'm from, don't actually need to be more creative, right? They got creativity down, right? Yeah. It's doing something with those ideas, right?
Yeah.
They really need it. But more so than strategies about doing something with those ideas, it's understanding that they could be this powerful, creative, compassionate force in the world. And still be in community. And not have to give up something that really matters to them. Because so many of the stories that we tell ourselves about creative success is that we have to give up something that really, really matters to us. So like if we get rich, then like we've sold out, or if we do our own creative thing, then we're going to be knocked out of the communities that we're in. So that's what the genesis of the Creative Giants post were, right? That's what it was, excuse me. And I think the easiest thing I'm going to say is maybe Lorna will hook it up in the show notes, but I think if you type in Creative Giants, you're going to find this particular post, and it's called Stand Tall Creative Giants. Read the 12 different things about there, and just understand that you're not alone, right? That's the main thing that I want people to get, creative people to get, is you're not alone. The doubts and the fears and the challenges that you have, like that's just what it means to be human. But more than that, when you're a multi-talented, experienced, creative person, that's going to create and compassionate, right? The compassionate piece is actually what can get you in a lot of trouble, right? Because there's this tendency to want to create and serve other people and run yourself dry. And sort of like this pendulum is like, oh, I'm exhausted, I'm not helping anyone, I'm just going to do my thing. But that's not where most of us really thrive. We thrive in this interdependent relationship.
Yeah, it's true.
Between things. And that's really, you can hear that same thread when I was talking about your readership. It's not a dependent or independent, it's an interdependent relationship.
Yeah.
Right? So the biggest thing is if you find yourself playing smaller so that you're not hurting other people's feelings, or so that you're not getting ostracized from your community, or so that you're not just being a weirdo, I would want you to play with the idea that there are other people just like you out there that also need to run and play with other creative giants, right?
Yeah.
And go do more of that. Find that community, right? You can check us out at Productive Flourishing. I'm not going to pitch over too much, right? But we're hanging out there. We're having conversations like this, right? And my big thing is, there might only be 1 in 100 people out there who are creative giants, and that's fine, right? Find the one.
Yeah.
Find that one and stand tall and do your best work, understanding that doing your best work means you're going to have some conversations, because our society is not set up for people to really do their best work. The economic structure is not really set up for that. Our relationship patterns oftentimes are not set up for that. The mindsets that we inherit from school are oftentimes not set up for that. So you're going to have to do some redefinition.
Yeah.
But crouching your entire life is a pain of its own.
That is true. Yeah, that's really powerful. Wow. I'm gonna have to go back and read that post again. I love just such great insights, and just so like you're reading everybody's mail. Like it's just so true.
Yeah, thanks. I get that. Like I've gotten some emails that people found it creepy when they read it the first time. It's like, this is creepy because I have all of these, which just means that it's not so much that I was reading their mail as I was reading my own.
Yeah.
Right. And just being clear about what my mail is and what's going on. And that's also what we do on the Creative Giant show when I have people on. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's great to talk about success and it's great to talk about all that, but what's it like to actually build a business or to write the book that you're scared of, or, you know, all the different things that come up in between the highlights of creative work.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And that's and just to understand that, yeah, like you were saying, like that you're not alone, right? Because maybe, do you think that helps? This is kind of going into the last question there, but does it help creatives when you are, you know, with another group of, I don't know, other creatives, other writers, or whatever the creativity that you're doing? Does it help when you're in a group just that you would stop so much undervaluing yourself and start to understand more of you know, of who you are and starting to value your creativity? Does that help being in a group, like to?
Absolutely. You know, I've written about this on the website where it's called Create, Connect, and Consume, right? That's the name. Yeah. Need to come up with a better title, but oh well, it works. So in a very simple model, in some ways what we've traditionally been taught is that to be a prolific creative person or be a productive creative person, you create stuff. Yeah. And you consume stuff, right? Yeah. And what I noticed with working with people and just my own patterns and just, you know, some of the explorations I was doing is that there's this critical piece that was often not talked about. Is you connect with people. Yeah. Right? You connect with other people who are creative, other people who are like you, or other people who are just growth oriented. And I think that's where people get tripped up, is they think that they have to connect with, say, another fiction writer. Actually, it doesn't necessarily. Like, fiction writers are going to understand the pain of being a fiction writer, right? Yeah. A little bit better. Yeah. But someone that's creative and growth oriented, open-minded, and really looking for creative partnership is going to provide so much fuel for your creativity, and probably even better than fiction writers. Because let's be honest, sometimes you get a bunch of creatives in the room, and it's all egos and self-doubt and flaunting that's happening, right? Because we're all triggered as hell. Because for the first time, we're in a room with people that actually have the talent that we have, and we're not the cool writer all of a sudden, right? Yeah. You get with other cool writers, and all of a sudden it's like, oh crap, like I got to stand out, or I like, oh, they're a better writer, and all this sort of head trash and BS comes up, right? Yeah. And so just being careful about that, right? And understanding that the way I say it is like, look, the way I see it is, we all have a peculiar set of expertise and experience and perspectives and interest, and just we're each unique. And it is impossible for my creative expression to be too similar to Lorna's creative expression. Yeah. She has this rich history that I will never have, right? Yeah. She has a way of writing and being in the world that I can never be. There's no way that Lorna and I are even really competing. Yeah. Right? The person, as a creative person, the only competition is with yourself. Yeah. Can you create your best version of your work? Can you not necessarily top what you did last time, but can you build upon what you did last time? Can you keep the journey going? And that's really the only question. Like, can I sit down, whether we're talking about a particular paragraph that's a part of a scene? Yeah. Right. can I hone that a little bit better? Can I make this scene crisper? Can I make this dialogue tighter? Can I introduce surprise? Like, those are the questions that actually freaking matter.
Yeah.
Like, what someone else is doing in the room, usually not so much.
Yeah.
Right. Unless they're giving you strategies for how to do those things. Like, hey, I had this particular problem. So that's a long way of saying yes, absolutely. I can go back and say where we get this whole like lone creative wolf myth from, but I think that's another one of those really destructive patterns that creative people have, is understanding that, like, yes, there are times where you need to close the door, to use Stephen King's sort of way of thinking.
Yeah.
Close the door and write. There's plenty of times where you need to open that door and let people in, and understanding that writer friend or that growth oriented friend that reads your novel or reads the scene and recognizes that it's got a hole in there and points it out is your best friend, is actually your best friend, right? Because they've just helped you create something better.
Yeah.
Rather than thinking like, oh, this is not ready. A book is never really done. You're done with the book, right? If you've ever finished anything, right, that's what happens. It's never really done. You're just done with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we've been talking in general mindset, but what I'll say on the productivity side is the sooner that you can get your work to a shareable state, and you can bring in the people, the editors, if you have one, highly recommended.
Yes.
Or your reading partners, and get it to them, just the faster you're going to be about getting that book out. And again, readers can't be delighted by a book you haven't finished.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's awkward to have a conversation about the book that you've been thinking about writing. Right.
Yes.
Trust me, I know, right? If you're a self-masochist, please write one of two kinds of books: write a productivity book or write a writing book. Sure way for misery. So I'm working on the productivity book, and I'm thinking, why not finish that one and then write a book on writing? Because why not, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I've already got the lashes and I've already built up the pain tolerance, so might as well go ahead and do that too, right?
Oh, you should. That'd be great.
No, I was joking about that. I'm not doing it, right? Well, I don't think I'm doing it. Let's see. And so, what am I going to say here? At the end of the day, the impact that you want to have as an indie writer only comes when you finish your work.
Yeah.
Not when you're thinking about it, not when you're dreaming about it. It comes from you finishing a scene at a time. Actually, if you want to get really granular, sentences create paragraphs, paragraphs create scenes, scenes create arcs, arcs create books.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It really is. From as far as, books go, novelettes, very similar thing, scenes to scenes. And that's your job,
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, well, I think that's where we're going to wrap it up, because that's just, such powerful thoughts there, but still, bringing it on home into this simplest, way for especially for new writers to understand, right? And to maybe stop beating themselves up so much, and to get into that creative zone and to embrace who they are as creative giants. Because I think that's a big thing that we all need to really get, right?
I'm biased, but I think that too.
Oh, Charlie, do you have so much insight on? That's just awesome. And so I just appreciate that you just took the time today to, talk to the rest of us writers and just give us some insights on that. That's awesome. So would you just talk about, projects or books that you have on the go right now? You were mentioning one.
So, you mentioned the small business life cycle, which is like the what to expect when you're expecting for small business owners, right? And
okay. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the first book. On business growth patterns. This next one is called Start Finishing. Working subtitle is How to Create Your Best Work and Thrive in the New World of Projects. And really, it's the way I like to think about it is the missing manual for creative knowledge workers, right? Of all types, right? Creative workers. And so that one, the tentative plan is to push it the traditional publishing route, because I wanted to get it in more people's hands.
Yeah.
And it turns out traditional publishers are good about that, right? So that's that one. And that one's part of a 4-series arc, right? So that one's around personal productivity for creative people. You can think about it that way. Second one, Start Finishing Together, which is around collective productivity. How as a team do we harness our collective creative potential? And the third one is lead the finish, which is really a leadership's perspective about creating systems in which people can finish the work, because leaders are historically terrible about having more ideas than their people can do, and then getting frustrated that the people are not doing the ideas. Like, it's not really their fault, buddy, right? And then the fourth book is what I don't have a name for it yet. But again, when you're talking about traditional publishing, that's, imagine 2.5, 3 years per book. So I've got a while to figure out what that fourth book is going to be, right? In the arc, but it's really around the how to pick the projects worth finishing. Right. And so that's really what that arc is. And then on the website, we have a slew of projects, some around, for instance, like the service pipeline, which is really, the service blueprint, which is really about how to create a sellable service. So that's for all those people that are like, I kind of like to, I got this helping hunch, but I don't know what to do with it. And actually it's a framework for letting people do that. So really on the website is where I do more of the creative, where I do more of the product development for individual creatives and small business owners. So I could go for a long time, but I don't know how much detail you want about the projects that I have in ARC. And as best as I can, I eat my own cooking on these things, where it's like we've got the book going, and then we've got these other smaller projects going. And a newer project that we're working on right now is, I don't have a name for it yet. I'm terrible with names for my own stuff, so I have to go out to my thought pack and figure that out. But it's really a compilation of our best material around staying motivated and inspired, and really the softer side of productivity, if it were. And so we'll be working on that one in March, and it'll probably be out March, maybe early April. So at least that's the tentative plan. As we get into it, it can take a life of its own, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Wow. That sounds really great. I mean, there's so much there that, even indie authors can take advantage of, right? Really
so let me introduce something real quick.
Sure. Yeah.
Because you just did it, and I caught you. Right. Indie is not a negative adjective, right? You're an author.
Okay.
That have chosen a particular pathway of getting your work out there in the world. It's not less than. Yeah. It's just, a particular way of producing your work out there in the world. And I'm saying that because I've seen so many indie authors kind of be embarrassed or ashamed of I'm an indie author, right? And it's like, no, you are a friggin' indie author, right? What that means is you're developing a conversation with a group of readers on your own, and you're producing work for them on your own. Yeah. That's noble. That's just as good as, going through everything else. And so you are an author, and to be an indie author on the commercial side, you're a business person. Yeah. That's true. And that means you create both delight and value for society. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate indie authors for that very reason.
Oh, that's awesome. That's good. Thanks for putting that into a better perspective. That's great. That's great. Well, it is actually quite a lot, as you know, quite a lot of work.
It's a surprising amount of work, right? I learned that with the first book, and I was like, this is half of the reason I'm thinking about going with the traditional publisher. I'm like, what? There's a lot of that whole distribution and thing that I don't feel like messing with, right? Yeah. It turns out I might be messing with them anyway. So there we go.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Okay, well, Charlie, thanks so much. This has been great, and people can find you at productiveflourishing.com.
Productiveflourishing.com. If you like bite-sized stuff, I'm on Twitter, but all roads lead to Productive Flourishing. Okay.
No, that's great. Well, thanks so much. I mean, I'm going to have to listen to it again and again and again, because I feel like I learned so much from you. So.
Well, thanks so much for having me, and really appreciate being here.
Awesome.